Have you ever experienced implicit bias? I have, and I kind of want to share that experience in my speech, but I'm also going to discuss the two videos that we were supposed to watch on communication styles and my reaction to those videos. I want to uncover the different topics that we did in the implicit bias project. So implicit bias, like my views on it, my own implicit bias based on some of the tests that I took that we were given, and the implicit bias I've noticed in Gainesville. I also want to discuss my views on the different communication styles I observed in the first video with the Sudanese refugees and the second video with May. I first want to discuss my answers to the implicit bias project. Before reading the articles, I was aware of implicit bias to a certain degree. I've heard of it before in a few different settings, one mostly being through social media or like other kinds of media like the news and articles and all sorts of things. But I think the other more significant experience I had with implicit bias or exposure to it was when I had my humanities class my first semester at Santa Fe. We discussed implicit bias a couple times, I believe, and as I understood it then, it was akin to prejudice or passing judgment on someone that you didn't really know. But now after reading the articles, I kind of think it's more like an unconscious thing that we do whenever we meet someone new or when we talk to people, and just we kind of judge people in our minds, but not like a bad way most of the time, but just, you know, we kind of get that first impression or a second impression or whatnot. As a whole, I believe that Gainesville is a lot better with implicit bias. I guess you could say that. Implicit bias, I've noticed a lot less of it in Gainesville than in Jacksonville. I think because Gainesville is a smaller community with a lot of colleges in it, so there's a lot of people from a lot of different walks of life, and they're all doing different things. So Jacksonville's bigger. It's where I was born and raised. But it's huge, it's less connected, you know, people are more judgmental because it's kind of like an industrial city. There's a lot of like business and finance and all sorts of big companies. So when I was discussing my major with a professional in Jacksonville, which is my experience with implicit bias, I was discussing with him that my major was animal science. I was going to be a veterinarian. But I think that the second or a couple minutes after I started noticing that I told him I was going to be a science major, he kind of gave me a weird judgment thing. And I believe it was due to the fact that I'm a female going into a STEM major, which is, it's coming along better now, but it used to be unheard of, and he's kind of older, so I felt like I was being judged like a female going into science. Who's heard of that? But I did take the test myself about majors and genders for one of the tests that we were given, and I did place females in a science role, probably due to my own experiences as a female in a science major, and I placed males in a liberal arts role. So I didn't think much about the liberal arts thing until I thought about the fact that most of my liberal arts teachers have been males in the past, so I believe that's probably a little bias I have based on my own experiences. The next thing I want to discuss is my reaction to the Understanding Communication Styles video, the one with the Sudanese refugees coming to America. I thought the video was very interesting, and it showed huge differences between communication styles in an indirect and direct setting. America is more direct in communication. We're less connected to one another. We don't really like strangers like walking up and talking to us because we think it's weird. While in Sudan, these men seem to express that you could just walk into someone's house and talk to whoever you wanted, ask for help from whoever you wanted. And they said that this was America being not friendly. I don't believe that's exactly the case. I don't think that Americans are just not friendly. I know there's a bunch of friendly people in America. There's also not friendly people in America, but the ratio is kind of different. I think it's mostly because in America we're taught from a young age to not talk to strangers, and we're more exposed to like dangers and when we're children, and so when we get older we're more wary of speaking with people we don't know. We don't know if they're like, if their intent is like malicious or if they're actually being friendly, probably, but you know, we never really know. And just we're just used to direct communication. We're not used to you know, being like, oh, come over to my house whenever you want, stranger who I don't know. um, I think that many places in America do have indirect communication, mostly small towns and small neighborhoods. Like my neighborhood is very indirect. So I don't think it's everywhere in America, but most of America is direct. I also want to talk about the second video, May, which it had a very different communication style than the first video. May was a nice video, but there weren't many words spoken in May, especially from the boys' perspective. But it didn't really need a lot of words for us to understand the meaning. I thought it wasn't such a romance kind of narrative, but more like a circumstances and the power of actions. For this video, I thought that the proper thing to say for it was that actions speak louder than words. Cliched, but true. Through the whole video, the boy doesn't say much, but he does a lot. Like, a lot of his actions speak a lot more than words would have. He watches each time May translates for the English-speaking customers that come up. He knows she wants to leave, but he knows that she also doesn't want to leave her father alone. She's worried about him. By the end of the video, he's learned to speak enough English that he can translate for the customers or speak to the customers who speak English, and May doesn't have to. So it kind of shows May that her father's business and her father will be all right without her, that this boy can help take over her role. The form of communication is very powerful, and a lot of times, you know, words can be misleading, but actions mostly are pretty direct in intention. So I thought the video was showing more of an indirect communication style. The characters already knew a lot about each other, so most of it was never actually spoken. In conclusion, I think there were very different communication styles in the video, and I also think that implicit bias sometimes affects communication styles. Implicit bias is the way we think about people, mostly unconsciously, and that can kind of affect how we communicate with one another and our attitudes toward people. I've experienced implicit bias myself, and I do have my own implicit biases toward others. I don't believe my own biases are pretty harmful. I don't really try to judge anyone. But it is interesting to know that I do have them, even when I didn't expect to have any. The first video about the Sudanese refugees showed how people who are used to indirect communication react to a nation where direct communication is normal. They think it's kind of off-putting as like a, I don't know, I guess a personality, but it's really not. The second video about May, the boy and her father, it showed that when using indirect communication, your actions can speak louder than your words. Thank you for listening.